Let me just briefly introduce our panelists. So today we've got Susie Farrell. She is a screenwriter. She is the person who wrote Sulphur and White. And I am going to ask about the title, Sulphur and White, by the way. And she is the co-creator and lead writer on a drama for BBC, BritBox America, and Long Story TV. She is currently working on an adaptation of A Marker to Measure Drift, what a great title, by Alexander Maxick for Memento Film International, and adapting the novel Her Husband's Lover for Wild Atlantic Pictures and Screen Ireland. David Tait is the survivor and the subject of Sulphur and White. He is the CEO of the World Gold Council. He's a brave, in fact, an extraordinary survivor of child sex abuse in the home and outside the home. And he's a charity mountaineer, which is the first time I've seen that phrase, but that's a great phrase, who has summited Mount Everest 5 times to raise 1.5 million pounds for the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. This is extraordinary. I don't know anyone else who has done anything close to that. And what I mean is climbing the mountain, not the money. It's an amazing achievement. He has spent over 35 years in the financial services industry, working for a variety of highly regarded firms, including Credit Suisse, USB Investment Bank, Goldman Sachs, Blue Crest Capital. His life story is the inspiration for this remarkable film. Thank you so much, David and Susie, for joining us today. You've created what I view as a work of art. You had some amazing individuals who clung to this project. I mean, you attracted top director, top producers, top actors. Let me start with Susie to say, how did this all happen in the movie world? I know that this is triggered by David's story, but from your perspective, how did it go from David's story and his struggles to this extraordinary vehicle?
It was actually remarkably fast for film, insofar as I think my first conversation was with Mike Elliott, who's a producer I was already working with, and I think we spoke the week after Cannes one year, and the following year I think we were already filming the same week. So in fact, in film terms, it was an incredibly fast process, and the reason for that really was because as soon as Mike told me about David and the world and the story, I felt that whilst there's a huge challenge in this sort of material, I felt really so very drawn to David's story, and I felt I could do something with it. And so we met very quickly. Actually, I think I had to pitch my idea for the film, and my identity wasn't even revealed to David at first. There was a whole secret squirrel approach, and then eventually we found out who each other was, and we met, and then it just became a situation where I had to become very close to him very quickly, very close to the story very quickly. So we talked, I think we met every day for a fortnight in this sort of funny gentleman's club in Mayfair, and we sat and talked from 9 in the morning until lunch, and then I stopped for lunch. David doesn't have lunch, but I do. So we stopped for lunch, and then we would resume and talk until 5:30, and then we were both so wrung out, but we picked up again the next day. So we really just spent a very short but intense period of time together. And then out of that, I went away and closed the door in a lot of ways, and then just told the story from my heart. And of course, I think for David should probably take over now, because I think initially for him, it was a bit of a shock how the story was.
Well, so how the heck, David, did Mike Elliott know to say to Susie, there's this great story out there? How did this all happen?
Well, there had been, I suppose, over the course, I originally wrote a manuscript in '07, trying to get a book published. And it failed miserably, I have to say. And
You
however,
stand in a long line of survivors. That is, I hope that it was heartening at least.
Yeah, I was pleased with what I wrote, but it was a bit too much climbing. And I tried to weave my story into it, but it didn't go anywhere. And over the course of subsequent years, we stumbled, or Alan Govenden, who drove the project essentially, stumbled around with me in tow, somewhat bemused behind him, thinking this is not going to go anywhere. But I didn't really say anything. I just kept going until one day I got frustrated and I decided to try and write down my story out of my head. But rather than write it down in a, I suppose, graphically accurate way, I tried in my own way to make a commercially viable version of my own story, with a view to trying to get it to be seen by more people. And so I wrote this somewhat James Bond version of myself story, which thankfully was just about adequate to get it in front of the guys at Emu Films, who saw straight through my idiotic attempts to be Daniel Craig. And instead, knowing full well, I think they knew Susie very well by that point, handed over my effort. And so it had been a door opener, nothing more, to get Susie into the room with me. And I think even when we started talking, I think at first I was a bit reticent to open up because I was still a bit of a James Bond in my head. But it soon became clear that I wasn't going to pull the wool over this woman's eyes, nor did I really want to. But I've not really spoken with such candor before. But I do remember sitting opposite Susie at one point and saying to myself, enough, tell her everything, let the pieces fall where they do. And I suppose it was a big leap of faith, because in many respects, I was nervous at both the writing level and director level that the salacious elements would be extracted and made the most of, and that the essence of what I was trying to do would be lost. But my fears were unfounded. Susie just went right to the core of everything every single time, shocked me with some of the revelations that, frankly, I hadn't even realized, most notably about my mother, I remember. And the result is as you see it. But when I received that draft, that notable August afternoon onto my iPad, I've told her I couldn't read it the first time. I struggled very hard to accept the reality of myself. Sounds a bit dramatic, but I really did struggle. And when I got through the 10th reading, I started to see it for what it was, the story for what it was. And that's when the film was born.
Wow. So you mentioned that you want this story to get out there. You want people to hear this story. Can you explain to the audience why that's so important to you?
Yes, the first reason is, as you acknowledged earlier, there are many stories about abuse. People understand the mechanics, at least most people understand the mechanics of what abusing a child means. I don't think people need that demonstrated to them in graphical terms. What's different about, well, I don't know, actually, what's different about this portrayal, not my story, is the collateral damage that someone like me, and many people like me, I believe, who have had gone through something like this, inflict on others through virtue of the manner in which it's changed their personality, the hatefulness that ensues from it, the revenge you want on people, the numbness it brings, your ability to turn off your emotions, all of which don't really do you much credit and affect many, many, many people around you. And I think that's what I really wanted to demonstrate, the far-reaching collateral damage and the viral effect that this has. There are many people who mention, well, an abuser becomes an abused becomes an abuser. I'm not truly a believer in that in a physical sense. To me, it's abhorrent. I can't comprehend, but I can see how I abused people in other ways as a consequence of what happened to me, knowingly or unknowingly. And I thought it was necessary to demonstrate the far-reaching consequences of what is, frankly, just a brutal physical act. So that's the main driver. And the second thing is, I wanted revenge. I thought to myself that if I can get this story out there and I can do some good with it, deep down inside, I'd stuck it to those guys all those years ago. And yeah, and I still feel that. It was a form of revenge from in my own little mind.
Well, you reached a really remarkable level of self-awareness through this whole project, because it's impossible to distinguish both I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other children. I want the world to see this and stop it. And then I really want to get the idiots that did this. These people were Satan, and I want the world to see them as that. And I got to say, Susie, you delivered, right? That is exactly what the world sees. And it is, I'm completely persuaded that our biggest weapon against child sex abuse is to educate parents of the reality and what they can do. And I'm going to come back in a minute, David, to your mom. But Susie, you had a lot to choose from, I'm assuming, in terms of scenes and also characters. How did you make those decisions?
I mean, it was actually quite simple for me. I mean, there was one way to tell the story for me, and because I think I was so overwhelmed by this sense of the persona of David and how carefully constructed that was, and how what was underneath that, which, because I think, David, it's truthful to say that so much of your identity was about strength. And of course, you know, if you have been through an experience where you're made so vulnerable, what you do is you need to protect yourself so much. And so David, whenever I first met him, was really the epitome of an alpha male, a powerful, successful man. And of course, the thing that I was most intrigued by and drawn to was really the opposite of that. It was the vulnerability of that and the child that was there. And so when it came to the story, I felt that what moved me most, well, of course, his relationship with his mother was a very tragic and particular part of the story. But what moved me most was David's wife, Vanessa, and how Vanessa was really able to sustain him with her love and her acceptance. And I found that so powerful, and was desperate to bring that to the screen, with the sense, I think, that that love can be redemptive and can surmount terrible tragedy, and the celebratory nature of that made for I think a fine subject for a film.
Well, I can tell you this viewer really felt the love as the redemption started, and as well the cruelty of the opening.
We couldn't ignore that, and we
No.
we couldn't really soft soap it. And of course, you know, I know initially for David it was really important that people understood what this subject matter was, because there is a lot of ignorance really as to, you know, what child abuse might mean, and it did feel really important. But you know, storytellers, we obviously wanted to make a film that, given the difficult subject matter, that did have the potential to reach people and to move people. So it couldn't simply be a misery fest or you know,
Right.
it had to also have something that really surmounted that trauma and that pain. And I think that's what I feel really most proud of, is that, you know, you can come out of that film feeling moved but also uplifted.
I think the phrase,
Yeah,
the love phrase, the phrase that's actually behind me on my shoulder, which is "love is an act of endless forgiveness," I think was an amazing phrase, and I don't think there could be anything more true. And what I hope would come through in the love affair that is in the film was the fact that I think Mark portrayed perfectly, never really believed that love. because, and the point being that I was confronted by this fantastic woman, amazing woman, who was about as tolerant as a human being could be towards me. And despite that demonstration of absolute love endlessly, I never believed it. And I constantly did not push her away, but kept testing it. Because the essence, deep down inside, as an abused person, I hate that phrase, but as an abused person, you never really believe that you are worthy of that love. And so you doubt it and you test it constantly. And I think what the film tried to show was that no matter how many times whack-a-mole, as my nickname for Vanessa is, kept getting whacked, she kept standing there and was there at the end and still here with me. Oh, I don't know how she does it, but she really is. And I really wanted that self-doubt and self-loathing to come through. She's not just an exceptional person, it's also that I have a fundamental problem believing it. She asked me the other day, she said, after all these years, we've been together, I think roughly 35 years now, on and off, you still don't trust me. And I said to her, I trust you more than anybody else. There's still that doubt because you just can't quite believe that you're worthy of that love.
You know, as a child who is destroyed by their parents, either through the abuse or watching and not helping with the abuse, why would you trust anybody? Right? I mean, there are so many people who are watching this right now who their primary challenge in life is trusting. So that came across as authentic and also as a gift to those who themselves were abused, because look, it's not just you, this is what we're all going through. And I thought that was really, it was perfectly done for the purpose of drawing them in. But as Susie was saying, it couldn't be a misery fest because your life isn't a misery fest.
Yeah.
Instead, it's that trajectory. But so I have to ask you a completely off-topic question. Are you a math savant? I mean, watching those numbers go by and you speaking to the screen, that was impressive. So you are, right?
No, it's something that people in financial markets work very hard at, is to make their job look very difficult when it's actually very easy. And that's what they won't tell you. And so they develop a language and they shout and scream and look cool. In reality, they're all pretty thick. And I was one of them. And there's no great talent to it. What did define me differently at the beginning of my tenure at Goldman Sachs back in those early days was that I did not care. I came into it completely numb. I came into it aggressive. It was perfect timing, early 80s. I walked straight in with an attitude that did not care if I lived the next day. So when I sat down in this vast room and started taking vast risk, I made all the partners blanch and think, oh my God, what's going on? But because I didn't care, I think that gave me the success. I was able to trade without a care in the world, and people can't do that. And far from being reckless, it gave me an edge. So that it's not a difficult job. They like to think it is, but it isn't. Trust me.
Well, you know, I was going to give it to you, but if you want to just say it's just, you know, ordinary activity, okay. But it really was impressive. And
I was very impressed by the scene that was created that day. A broker in London, Sir Michael Spencer, gave me the entire ICAP organization for 6 working days.
Wow.
Hell of a gesture. It's worth millions of dollars to me. And we created those scenes over 2 long weekends. And well, I think they'll go down in history because those trading desks have now been destroyed, and there's nothing like that now in London at all. Hugely proud of that. Fantastic to be part of it that day. Swept along. Incredible.
Fascinating. So, so how old were you when you told Vanessa? Was that the first time you had told anybody?
Yes,
that this
when
had
I
happened
told,
to
when I
you?
told Vanessa, that was, oh God, when was that? 2002, 2003. That's when I first told her.
And how
I
old were
first
you?
told, 40,
40.
40. Yeah,
So
40, yeah, something like
about 50% of survivors come forward by age 50, only
Mm.
50%, and 50% come forward or never come forward after the age of 50. So you're right there in the thick of those numbers. And so you were 40 when you actually first started talking about it. Did you go into therapy? How did you deal with all of this new angle of your life that was now part of it again?
Mm. Well, I fully expected Vanessa to walk away. I can't really remember what really made me tell her that day. I know exactly where I was. I was sitting in a bar in Beaver Creek, of all places, skiing, and I suddenly came out one day. And no, I didn't. She asked me to. She said that I should, and I've always said that I'm the one person who's thought about it the most, and I don't believe anybody's going to advise me about it. She said, well, just talking about it might help. So if you fast forward to 2010, when the charity turned around to me and said, David, would you mind talking about what had happened to you? Remember, I wrote this manuscript in 2007,
Right.
and they became aware of it, just at a very high level, that something had happened. And so in 2010, I made a speech on behalf of the charity at the British Museum in front of 300 or 400 people. I'd never made a speech in my life to that point. And I got up on this stage next to Michael Palin, the actor. And I cannot describe to you how terrified I was. I almost ran. People turned their back on me for a minute, and I almost ran. Swear to God, I did. But I got up and I did it. And I did this speech, which is half Everest. I've done Everest 3 times by then. And half Everest, which I try and ham up, and then then I hit them. I deliberately tried to turn the tide, get them relaxed, and then bang, to try and create that effect. And the world changed for me. I started to realize that it wasn't just climbing that was filling this void inside me, this self-esteem bucket that I needed filling up, whether it be romantic relationships, or ultimately now it turned into climbing a mountain. I found that being able to speak about it and seeing the number of people who came up to me as a consequence, I was deluged. I mean, absolutely deluged with contacts when I first started. It became very onerous. I realized that now I could do some real good. And then the money and the talking and then climbing found I finished with that and continuing doing what I'm doing now. But the point of this is, did it make any difference to me talking about it? Did it make me feel better? Absolutely not.
No.
Doesn't change it one iota. People think, oh, you make it look so easy talking. No, I'm not. I'm sweating like you wouldn't believe. My legs are shaking every time. I get dry mouthed every time. People don't know. But do I get a therapeutic response from that? No, I have not once made it feel better. I've just got more used to saying it slightly.
So I wonder though, and I completely believe that, because you're not doing advanced psychotherapy by giving a speech, right? And by simply telling the story. That's not going to be the result. But it sounds to me like you're really deeply motivated by doing good with the story you have.
I'm desperately trying to. The idea behind the film was all the proceeds that I would get from the film go to the charity. I'm trying to make sure that people understand they're not alone. That's the most consistent thing people say to me when they come up to me after big speeches. Thank you for saying it. I can't, but I really appreciated seeing you do that, because I'm not losing my mind. And I thought the film itself is for all the people around the abused person, not really the abused person. And so, yes, I do gain some solace from the fact I'm doing good. It sounds very pious, but yeah, that's what's left. That's what it's about. And having the guts to get up and do it. I don't decry people who don't have those guts, by the way. I made myself do it because I was scared into doing it. And that's the beachy head thing. I didn't change it through being brave. I changed it because I was scared to death. And that was my driver.
Another really authentic point here, which
Oh, yeah,
means
there
you're
was no
really
bravery
brave.
involved, trust me.
It means you're really brave, but you know, I respect your framing of it. So many survivors from the families, which of course is just another institution that has been built that create opportunities for children to be harmed, unfortunately. But there are a lot of survivors out there who are even angrier with the parent who knew about it and didn't do anything than they are with the abuser. So it was clear in the movie that your relationship with your mother is complicated, to put it mildly. But what were your feelings when she first showed up in that, wherever she first showed up after all those years?
Well, Susie Tait should take a lot of credit for this because, and I'm sure she can comment afterwards how she focused in on this point largely, frankly, before I did, to be honest. She showed up at my wedding, and this is where I'm not going to cover myself in glory. I denied her access to me and shut her out of my life for a long time as she got more and more ill. And in a very sick way, it's my way of getting revenge. She backed my father, and I was going to have my revenge come what may, to the extent she stood outside that wedding that time. I think back on this now, and I feel like physically sick that I was able to do this stuff, but I was very motivated to do this. And finally, she got incredibly ill, and she was never able to completely come to terms with what had happened. She tried to, and then one particular day, and this is not reflected in the film, sadly, they decided it was too much, funnily enough. She took her own life and she chose to starve herself. And quite why she chose that method was beyond either myself or my sister. But I eventually found her in this room, having gone from an 11-stone woman to a 6-stone woman. And then she slowly deteriorated she'd done so much damage, she eventually faded away. And that's the room scene you see in the film. What you don't see is how she got there, because, you know, but yeah, I'd chosen perhaps not to focus on the fact that she left me in that home, because I was capable of defending myself at that point. And so I never really gave it a lot of thought. I was no longer vulnerable physically. But it was fascinating when Susie, I remember sitting opposite me, suddenly said, "Your mother left you." And Susie, you remember that moment? I just stared at you. I hadn't really thought about it too much, to be totally frank.
Susie, the script captures the ways in which parents can harm a child and then enable the one who's harming them, leaving the child. They just don't have a chance. Both of your parents are in on this conspiracy in a lot of ways. How did you make the decisions about how to tell that part of it?
And so it was very painful for David, I think, because actually, David, I felt David was carrying a lot of guilt about the end of his mother's life, and also in some ways blaming his mother, but also blaming himself. And so it was really, for me, because I was able to obviously see things with the distance of an outsider. And when I sort of suggested to him, you know, that my point, which was that his mother had abandoned him in a lot of ways and exposed him, I think David, because he'd accepted this sort of sense that he'd brought this on himself in some way, and also that he felt very bad about how his mother had died. And so for me, it was the complexity of his mother that felt really key to getting in the story. And this is absolutely not about finding blame or punishment or anything like that. It was about really the truth of these situations where there are often adults who are incapable or weak or cannot stand the truth, and therefore fail their children in some way. And I think that to gain that sort of complexity felt very, very key to us. And I think, David, your feelings about, if it's fair to say, but I felt that through the process of making the film, perhaps you found some peace around that. So I hope that was the case, but certainly it felt a more positive place at the end of things than at the beginning, where your feelings about your mother were on one, they were extreme, they were quite extreme, and on one level completely blaming yourself, on another level, not looking back on the memories of it in a very complex way.
That's true. It was a revelation to me, and I still remember that day thinking, wow, because you're dead right, absolutely focused on my part in that horrific end, and I've driven her to it, and I had, and in all honesty, I did do that. I ignored her pleas. She got more and more ill as a consequence of that treatment. However, what you opened my eyes to was why I was perhaps doing it. And it sounds obvious, I should have connected, but I didn't. I didn't really think of it that way because I was older. And yet I did. And when I'm honest, I'm able to say now, to your point, say now, that what happened wasn't really right, wasn't acceptable. And I did, into my late teens and early 20s, vengeful to beyond belief, and a great advantage, as I've described in my work life, but not very good with everybody else. And I made her pay, and yeah, one of my biggest regrets, to be honest.
Yeah, and for all the survivors that are listening to us, victims always feel guilty. It's always the kid's fault for some reason. They were in the wrong space. They tempted the person. They weren't a good son. They weren't doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. And so, I mean, it says something about your own humanity, that as you look back, you continue to be more concerned about the well-being of your mother than yourself in some ways. So Susie brought the complexity, the difficult aspect of that forward. And I think for so many survivors, it's validating. It's validating to see someone else explaining in this very beautiful movie, this is what happens. So I want to close, because I know we've got a lot of questions, but I want to close by saying thank you to both of you. For making the film, for coming to talk to those of us in the United States about the film. And it's an achievement, which is
Thank you,
something.
Marci.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the film, I have to say. I wouldn't have changed a thing. It was the 2 weeks in Africa watching myself be acted out as a little boy with my parents in front of my eyes. It was, without doubt, changed me fundamentally at my core. And I'm so pleased that at least if one person benefits from it, sounds silly, but if one person benefits, then it's worth it. And I've got my revenge, which is so important to me.
I guarantee you've got a lot more than one. So you've got revenge times many. Susie, will we see you in this space again, or is this one of those topics that you feel like this is the best you could possibly do?
It's an incredibly difficult subject to write about, I can't lie, and it affected me quite profoundly whenever I finished that draft, and David was reading it and finding it hard to accept. I remember feeling like utterly wrung out emotionally. It really took its toll, actually. So it would be a really I think once we gone through the process of making the film, and I saw what we'd managed to achieve with it, I also felt immensely proud. I can't lie, I probably won't rush back to tell the story again. I think we've done our very best with David's story, but by the same token, it's an honor to be able to be part of the process of talking about it afterwards and enabling that discussion to be ongoing.
You know, the two of you created healing, which is encouraging to all of us. Thank you so much.
An absolute pleasure. And thank you, Susie, once again for helping me through my life. Thank you,
Thanks so
Marci.
much. It was an honor.